The moment she stepped onto Yale's campus, it felt like stepping into a completely different universe. The buildings were grand, the air buzzed with energy, and everywhere she looked, students walked around with an air of confidence that seemed almost intimidating. Some carried expensive laptops, others spoke languages she didn't recognize, and many wore clothes that screamed sophistication. For someone who came from a small town where everyone knew each other by name, this place was overwhelming. Still, she reminded herself why she was here. This wasn't just about surviving college. It was about proving to herself and maybe even to the world that she belonged. Her first few days were a whirlwind of orientation events, introductions, and trying to figure out how to navigate the sprawling campus. But soon enough, talk of the annual debate tournament began circulating. It was one of the most prestigious competitions in the country, drawing top debaters from universities across the globe. Just hearing about it made her heart race. She knew this was her chance to test herself against the best. Signing up for the tournament felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Sure, she'd done well in high school, but this was Yale, a place where people grew up attending elite prep schools and had access to resources she could only dream of. Still, she couldn't let fear stop her. If anything, the thought of facing such tough competition excited her. She spent every spare minute preparing, diving deep into research papers, practicing speeches in front of the mirror, and even recording herself to catch mistakes in her delivery. Her roommate often joked that she was more married to her notes than to anyone else. Finally, the day of the tournament arrived. The auditorium was packed with spectators, students, professors, alumni, and even some journalists covering the event. As she waited backstage, she could hear the murmur of voices outside. When her name was called, she took a deep breath, smoothed out her skirt, and walked onto the stage. That's when it happened, the laughter. Not loud or obnoxious, but subtle chuckles rippling through the crowd. A few heads turned toward each other, eyebrows raised as if silently asking, "Is this really who we're supposed to take seriously?" It stung, of course. No matter how many times she'd faced doubt before, moments like these always hit hard. But instead of letting it shake her, she used it as fuel. She reminded herself of all the late nights spent studying, the sacrifices her mom had made, and the countless hours she poured into honing her craft. Those chuckles weren't going to define her. They were just background noise. Her opponent in the first round was a seasoned debater from Oxford, known for his sharp intellect and polished delivery. He exuded confidence, walking onto the stage like he already owned it. When they shook hands, he gave her a polite smile, though there was a flicker of condescension in his eyes. The topic they were debating was complex, something about international trade policies and their impact on developing nations. Most people would have been intimidated, but she thrived under pressure. When it was her turn to speak, she started slow, choosing her words carefully. She knew she didn't need flashy visuals or overly complicated jargon to win over the audience. Instead, she focused on clarity and connection. She broke down the issue into simple terms, explaining how global trade agreements often left smaller countries at a disadvantage. Then, she brought it home with personal anecdotes, sharing stories of farmers back in her hometown who struggled to compete with imported goods. You could feel the mood in the room shift as she spoke. Eyes that had been skeptical moments earlier were now glued to her, hanging on every word. By the time she finished, the entire auditorium was silent. Even her opponent looked impressed, nodding slightly as he prepared his rebuttal. When the judges announced their decision, there was no question she'd won the round decisively. The same people who had laughed when she walked on stage were now clapping enthusiastically, some even standing up to show their appreciation. One judge later pulled her aside and said, "You have a gift. Don't ever lose sight of it." That victory gave her a boost of confidence, but she knew it was only the beginning. The next rounds promised tougher opponents and even higher stakes. Each match pushed her to dig deeper, think faster, and articulate her points with precision. There was the Harvard senior who specialized in economic policy, throwing numbers and statistics at her like weapons. She countered by focusing on the human side of the argument, reminding everyone that behind every statistic was a real person affected by policy decisions. Then there was the Cambridge champion, famous for his quick wit and ability to dismantle arguments mid-sentence. Facing him felt like sparring with a verbal ninja. But instead of trying to outsmart him, she leaned into her strengths. She stayed calm, listened intently, and responded with logic so airtight it left him scrambling. By the end of their debate, even he admitted she'd given him a run for his money. With each round, the crowd grew larger, the stakes higher, and the pressure more intense. Yet, she never lost sight of why she was doing this. It wasn't about proving people wrong or silencing critics. It was about using her voice to make a difference. Every time she stepped onto that stage, she carried with her not just her own dreams, but also the hopes of everyone who had ever doubted themselves because of where they came from or how they sounded. And so, as the tournament progressed, what started as nervous laughter from the audience transformed into genuine admiration. People began talking about her, not just as a good debater, but as someone who embodied resilience, intelligence, and grace under fire. They saw beyond the shy girl with a southern accent and recognized the powerhouse she truly was. Little did they know, the biggest challenges and the most unforgettable moments were still ahead. By the time the semifinals rolled around, the tournament had become more than just a competition. It was a battlefield of ideas. The stakes were higher than ever, and every single debater left in the running was a force to be reckoned with. She could feel the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders, but instead of letting it crush her, she used it to push herself harder. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving something deeper to herself, to the world, and maybe even to those who still doubted her. The topic for the semifinal round hit close to home: systemic inequality in education. It was a subject that stirred emotions in her chest every time she thought about it. Growing up, she'd seen firsthand how broken the system was. Her school back in her small town barely had enough textbooks to go around, let alone teachers, who weren't stretched thin trying to manage overcrowded classrooms. And yet, despite all the obstacles, she'd managed to claw her way out, not because the system worked, but because she refused to give up. Her opponent was a confident graduate student from Princeton, someone who had spent years studying policy reform and spoke with an air of authority that commanded respect. He walked onto the stage dressed impeccably, his notes perfectly organized, his posture radiating confidence. When he began speaking, his arguments were sharp and well-researched. He argued that individual effort was the key to overcoming barriers, that, no matter where you came from, success was possible if you worked hard enough. It was a message people loved to hear, one that sounded inspiring on the surface. But she knew better. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and let the room settle into silence. She started by acknowledging her opponent's points, nodding respectfully as she summarized his stance. "Hard work is important," she said, her voice steady and clear. "But what happens when the odds are stacked so high against you that no amount of hard work seems enough?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. Then, she dove into her argument, weaving together data, history, and personal stories in a way that made the abstract feel painfully real. She talked about schools in low-income neighborhoods that lacked basic resources, computers that didn't work, libraries with outdated books, counselors overwhelmed by caseloads too big to handle. She shared statistics showing how funding disparities perpetuated cycles of poverty, leaving entire communities trapped in systems designed to fail them. But it wasn't just numbers and facts that captured the audience's attention. It was the way she brought those figures to life. She told the story of her own mother, who worked double shifts as a nurse just to keep food on the table and send her to a decent school. She described late nights sitting at the kitchen table, poring over borrowed textbooks because their family couldn't afford new ones. She spoke about the teachers who went above and beyond, spending their weekends tutoring students for free because they believed in their potential. Her voice cracked slightly as she recounted the sacrifices her mom had made, but she didn't shy away from the emotion. If anything, it made her words land even harder. You can't tell a child whose school doesn't have heat in the winter or air conditioning in the summer that all they need to succeed is determination, she said, her tone firm but compassionate. You can't ask someone to dream big when the world keeps telling them their dreams don't matter. Systemic inequality isn't just a problem, it's a barrier, and until we address it head on, we're failing entire generations. The room was silent when she finished. Not the awkward kind of silence where people aren't sure how to react, but the kind that comes when everyone is holding their breath, processing what they've just heard. You could see it in their faces the way some nodded slowly, while others wiped away tears. Even her opponent looked shaken, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet respect. After the debate ended, the judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity. When they finally announced the winner, there was no surprise, it was unanimous. She had won, not just because her arguments were stronger, but because she had connected with the audience in a way that few debaters ever did. People lined up afterward to congratulate her, shaking her hand and thanking her for sharing her perspective. One elderly woman approached her with tears in her eyes, saying, "You reminded me why I became a teacher. Thank you." That night, as she sat in her dorm room replaying the day in her mind, her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. Messages poured in from friends, family, and even strangers who had watched the debate online. Some called her performance inspiring, while others simply thanked her for giving voice to struggles they'd lived through themselves. For the first time, she realized her words weren't just reaching the people in the auditorium. Were resonating far beyond it. It wasn't just the victory that stayed with her, though. It was the realization that debating wasn't just about winning trophies or impressing judges. It was about using her platform to shine a light on issues that mattered, to amplify voices that often went unheard. As she scrolled through the messages, flooding her inbox, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just about her journey anymore, it was about creating space for others to step forward too. The next morning, she woke up knowing the final round would be the toughest challenge yet. But she also woke up with a renewed sense of clarity. Winning wasn't just about proving herself, it was about showing the world that stories like hers mattered. That resilience, determination, and the courage to speak your truth could change hearts and minds. And as she prepared for the last showdown, she carried that belief with her, ready to face whatever came next. The grand finale of the tournament was unlike anything she'd experienced before. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation, filled to capacity with students, professors, alumni, and even a few journalists covering the event. Cameras flashed as debaters took their places on stage, and the energy in the room felt electric. This wasn't just another round. It was the culmination of weeks of preparation, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices. For her, it was also the moment where all the laughter, doubts, and skepticism she'd faced throughout her journey would either be silenced or validated. Her opponent in the final round was none other than the defending champion, a charismatic law student from Columbia University. He was known for his theatrical flair, delivering speeches that were as entertaining as they were persuasive. His reputation preceded him. He had won this very tournament 2 years in a row, and many considered him unbeatable. To make matters worse, the topic they were debating was one she knew little about, whether artificial intelligence posed a greater threat than benefit to humanity. It was technical, complex, and far outside her comfort zone for a brief moment. Backstage, doubt crept in. How could she possibly compete against someone who seemed tailor-made for debates like this? She didn't have his experience with advanced topics, nor did he carry the weight of being underestimated every step of the way. But then she remembered why she was here, not to prove herself to others, but to rise above her own fears. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of something her mom used to say: "You don't have to know everything to win. You just have to care enough to learn." And so she dove headfirst into research. For days leading up to the final, she pored over articles, watched lectures, and consulted professors to understand the nuances of AI ethics. She learned about algorithms, bias in machine learning, and the potential consequences of automation on jobs and privacy. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the jargon made her head spin, but she refused to give up. Instead of trying to master every detail, she focused on finding real-world examples that illustrated the human impact of AI, stories of marginalized communities affected by biased algorithms became her anchor. If she couldn't outsmart her opponent with technical expertise, she would outshine him with empathy and clarity. On the day of the final, the tension in the room was palpable. When the moderator introduced the topic, the Columbia debater immediately launched into his opening statement. His delivery was flawless, confident, polished, and packed with flashy visuals. He spoke about AI's potential to revolutionize industries, cure diseases, and solve global challenges. His arguments were compelling, backed by data and futuristic projections that painted a picture of boundless possibilities. By the time he finished, the audience erupted into applause, clearly impressed. When it was her turn, she walked to the podium with steady steps, ignoring the knot in her stomach. She began softly, almost conversationally, acknowledging the incredible advancements AI had brought to the world. There's no denying that artificial intelligence has transformed our lives in ways we never thought possible, she said, her voice calm but commanding. But progress without responsibility can come at a cost, and often it's the most vulnerable among us who pay the price. She went on to explain how AI systems, designed by humans, often reflected the biases of their creators. Algorithms used in hiring processes frequently discriminated against women and minorities. Facial recognition software struggled to accurately identify people of color, leading to wrongful arrests and surveillance abuses. Autonomous weapons raised ethical questions about accountability in warfare. Each example she shared was rooted in reality, backed by studies and news reports, but what truly resonated was the way she connected these issues to everyday lives. Imagine being denied a job because an algorithm decided your resume wasn't good enough, she continued, her tone firm yet empathetic. Or imagine walking down the street, minding your own business, only to be flagged by a faulty system that mistakes you for someone else. These aren't hypothetical scenarios, they're happening right now to real people. And unless we address these problems, I won't just be a tool for innovation. It will become a weapon of oppression. As she spoke, the room grew quieter, the initial excitement giving way to reflection. Her words weren't flashy or dramatic, but they carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. She stripped away the complexity of AI and revealed its human side, the lives it touched, the harm it caused, and the responsibility society had to ensure it was used ethically. By the time she finished, there was a collective exhale from the audience, followed by thunderous applause. Her opponent tried to counter her arguments during his rebuttal, pointing out that regulation could stifle innovation and slow progress. But his points lacked the emotional punch of her storytelling. He relied on logic and statistics, which were impressive, but they failed to connect with the audience on the same visceral level. By the end of the debate, it was clear that this wasn't just a clash of intellects, it was a battle of approaches. Where he dazzled with complexity, she captivated with simplicity and heart. When the judges announced their decision, the room held its breath. One by one, they praised both debaters for their skill and preparation. Then came the verdict. She had won. The crowd erupted into cheers, some standing to applaud, while others wiped away tears. As she accepted the trophy, her hands trembled not from nerves, but from the overwhelming realization of how far she'd come. Backstage, reporters swarmed her, eager to capture her thoughts on the historic win. Meanwhile, her family watched online, sobbing with pride as they saw their girl shine on such a massive stage. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the day's events, she allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what she'd accomplished. Winning Yale's prestigious debate tournament wasn't just a personal victory, it was proof that resilience, authenticity, and hard work could overcome even the toughest odds. But more importantly, it reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling. Facts and figures might inform, but stories inspire. They remind us of our shared humanity and challenge us to see the world through someone else's eyes. As she drifted off to sleep, exhausted but exhilarated, she knew this was only the beginning. The spotlight may have been on her now, but her goal had never been fame or recognition. It was to use her voice to create change, to amplify the struggles of those who couldn't speak for themselves. And as she prepared to step off the stage and back into the real world, she carried that mission with her, ready to tackle whatever came next. Winning Yale's debate tournament changed everything for her family, and for the countless people who saw themselves in her story. The moment the trophy was placed in her hands, it wasn't just a symbol of victory. It was proof that dreams could come true even when the odds were stacked against you. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, calling her performance historic and hailing her as a rising intellectual force. Social media exploded with messages from strangers, some congratulating her, others sharing their own struggles and thanking her for inspiring them to keep going. For the first time, she realized her journey wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something bigger. In the weeks that followed, invitations poured in from all directions. Universities wanted her to speak at commencement ceremonies. Advocacy groups asked her to join panels on education reform and social justice. Talk shows invited her to share her story with millions of viewers. At first, she felt overwhelmed by the attention. Growing up in a small town, she'd always been used to flying under the radar. Now, cameras flashed wherever she went, and reporters clamored for sound bites. But instead of letting the spotlight intimidate her, she embraced it not for herself, but because she knew this was an opportunity to make a difference. She began using her platform to talk about the issues that mattered most to her: systemic inequality, access to education, the importance of representation. These weren't just abstract concepts to her. They were lived experiences. Every speech she gave, every interview she did, carried the same message: your voice matters, no matter where you come from or how the world tries to silence you. She told stories of her childhood, of watching her mom work double shifts just to put food on the table, of sitting alone in the library after school because there was no one at home to help her with homework. These weren't easy memories to revisit, but she shared them anyway, knowing they might inspire someone else to believe in themselves. One of the most meaningful moments came when she returned to her hometown. Walking through the familiar streets brought back a flood of emotions, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Her old high school welcomed her back with open arms, hosting an assembly in her honor. As she stood on stage, looking out at a sea of young faces, she felt a lump form in her throat. These kids were just like her, once full of potential, but unsure if anyone would ever notice. She spoke directly to them, urging them to chase their dreams without fear. "You don't need permission to be great," she said, her voice steady despite the tears welling up in her eyes. "You don't need fancy resources or connections to succeed. All you need is determination and the courage to speak your truth. And trust me, the world will listen." After the assembly, dozens of students approached her, eager to ask questions, or simply thank her for coming. One girl, barely 14 years old, handed her a crumpled piece of paper with a shy smile. On it was written a short essay about wanting to become a lawyer someday but feeling too scared to try. "I didn't think anyone would care what I had to say," the girl admitted quietly. She knelt down to meet her eye level and said, "Your words are powerful. Never forget that." That interaction stayed with her long after she left the school. It reminded her why she started debating in the first place. Back at Yale, life settled into a new rhythm. People treated her differently now, not just as a talented debater, but as a leader. Professors encouraged her to pursue graduate studies. Classmates sought her advice on public speaking, and younger students looked up to her as a role model. Yet she remained grounded, refusing to let success go to her head. She continued mentoring students, both at Yale and back home, helping them build confidence and critical thinking skills. She believed deeply that everyone deserved a chance to shine, especially those who had been overlooked by society. Years later, as she stood delivering a keynote address at a global leadership summit, she reflected on how far she'd come. The auditorium was packed with influential figures, politicians, entrepreneurs, activists, all gathered to discuss solutions to the world's biggest challenges. When she walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. For a moment, she paused, taking it all in. This was a long way from the girl who used to practice speeches in front of a cracked mirror in her bedroom. Her speech that day focused on resilience, the kind that comes not from avoiding failure but from facing it head-on. She talked about the laughter she'd endured when she first stepped onto the debate stage, the skepticism she'd faced at every turn, and the moments when she doubted herself the most. "They laughed because they didn't see me," she said, her voice strong and clear. "But I saw myself. I saw the girl who loved books more than anything, the teenager who refused to give up, the woman who believed her voice could change the world. And that belief kept me going, even when the path ahead seemed impossible." By the end of her speech, the room was silent except for the sound of sniffles and muffled sobs. People lined up afterward to shake her hand, some lingering to share their own stories of overcoming adversity. A young man approached her, his eyes red from crying, and thanked her for reminding him that he wasn't alone. "Your words saved me today," he said simply. Those 5 words meant more to her than any trophy ever could. Looking back, she knew her journey hadn't been easy. There were times when the weight of expectation felt unbearable, when the pressure to succeed threatened to crush her spirit. But through it all, she held on to one truth: every challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger, every doubt a chance to prove herself wrong. Winning the debate tournament had been a turning point, but it wasn't the destination. It was the beginning of a lifetime dedicated to lifting others up, to showing them that their voices mattered too. As she walked off the stage that evening, surrounded by admirers and well-wishers, she allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, new battles to fight, but she was ready. Because deep down, she knew the same thing that had carried her this far would guide her forward: the unshakable belief that even the quietest voice can spark the loudest change. In a quiet little town in Georgia, life moved at its own pace. The streets were lined with old oak trees, and everyone seemed to know each other by name. It was here that a young girl grew up with dreams bigger than anyone around her could imagine. This wasn't just any ordinary girl. She had something special inside her, even if no one noticed it at first. Her mom worked tirelessly as a nurse, pulling long hours to make ends meet. Her dad? He left when she was barely 5 years old. Life wasn't easy for them, but somehow the girl found comfort in books. She'd spend hours at the local library flipping through pages of novels, biographies, and anything else she could get her hands on. Words became her escape, her safe haven. Whether it was stories about heroes overcoming impossible odds or essays written by great thinkers, she soaked it all in like a sponge. But reading wasn't enough for her. She started writing too. At night, after finishing her homework, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen, scribbling down thoughts, ideas, and arguments. Sometimes these were imaginary debates where she played both sides. Other times, they were passionate letters to people who didn't exist, defending causes she cared deeply about. Her mom often peeked over her shoulder while cooking dinner, and smiled, proud of how much fire this shy girl carried within her. By the time high school rolled around, she decided to join the debate team. No one expected much from her, not because they doubted her intelligence, but because she was so reserved. People thought debating meant shouting and being loud, qualities she didn't seem to have. Plus, their school's debate team wasn't exactly winning awards. They struggled to afford travel expenses, let alone fancy coaching sessions. Most tournaments felt like uphill battles before they even began. Still, she wasn't discouraged. If anything, she saw it as a challenge. Without access to expensive resources, she turned to free tools instead. YouTube tutorials taught her the basics of public speaking, while dog-eared copies of famous speeches gave her inspiration. She practiced in front of the mirror, timing herself, tweaking her tone, and learning how to control her nerves. Slowly, but surely, she transformed into someone unrecognizable from the quiet kid who used to blend into the background. Her first tournament was nerve-wracking. As she stepped onto the stage, she could feel eyes boring into her. Some competitors smirked when they heard her southern accent. Others exchanged glances, clearly thinking she wouldn't last long. But none of that mattered once she opened her mouth. Her voice rang out clear and steady, cutting through the air like a knife. She presented her case with logic so sharp it left opponents scrambling for counter-arguments. By the end of the day, she'd won her round and earned newfound respect from her teammates. Word spread quickly about the girl who could hold her ground against anyone. Regional tournaments followed, and with each victory, her confidence grew. Yet skepticism still lingered wherever she went. Judges sometimes looked skeptical when they saw her name on the roster. Opponents underestimated her, assuming her calm demeanor meant weakness. Every single time, she proved them wrong. Not with aggression or arrogance, but with sheer brilliance. Her ability to weave facts, emotions, and storytelling into her arguments made her stand out. People began calling her the underdog champion. When news broke that she'd been accepted into Yale University on a full scholarship, reactions were mixed. Folks back home cheered loudly, celebrating her achievement as proof that hard work pays off. But not everyone believed she belonged there. Whispers floated around town, questioning whether she'd be able to keep up with the elite students at such a prestigious institution. Doubts gnawed at her too, but deep down she knew better. She wasn't going to Yale just to survive. She was going to thrive. The summer before college, she spent countless nights preparing. She read everything she could find about Ivy League culture, studied past debate topics, and rehearsed speeches until her throat hurt. When the day finally came to leave for Yale, her mom hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You're gonna do amazing things," she whispered. Those words stayed with her as she boarded the bus, carrying nothing but a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of determination. Little did anyone know, This small-town girl was about to shake up the world of competitive debating in ways no one anticipated. What started as a hobby fueled by curiosity and passion was about to turn into something extraordinary. And though the road ahead promised challenges, she faced them head-on, ready to show the world what she was truly made. OF